The airport was busy with voices and footsteps everywhere, people rushing with heavy bags, announcements echoing across the halls, children laughing and some crying. In the middle of all this noise, a quiet woman walked slowly. She held the hand of her little boy who clutched a small toy airplane tightly. Her eyes looked calm, but inside her heart was full of nervous thoughts. She had saved money for months to take this flight. It was important for her and her child, and she wanted nothing to go wrong. They walked carefully to the gate. The boy asked softly if the plane would be very big. The mother smiled and said yes, it would be very big and very strong. Her gentle voice made the boy feel safe. Together they entered the long line. They gave their tickets, and finally they stepped onto the plane. The boy's eyes grew wide with excitement, while the mother whispered a prayer in her heart for a safe journey. The seats were almost full. Voices filled the air. Some people laughed loudly. Some spoke on phones. Some argued with the crew. And there in the middle sat a man who looked very different from the rest. His suit was dark blue and shiny. His shoes polished like glass. His wrist carried a thick golden watch, and his face carried a smile that was more proud than kind. He was a billionaire businessman who believed money gave him the right to laugh at anyone. When the mother and son walked near him, the billionaire leaned back with a smirk. He whispered to the passenger next to him, his words sharp like knives, asking why they let people like her in business class. He said the cabin was meant for important people, not for a simple woman with an old handbag and a boy playing with a toy. His laugh was low but cruel, loud enough that the mother heard every word. The boy looked up at her with questioning eyes, and she pressed his hand gently, telling him with silence to ignore it. The mother sat down 2 seats away from the billionaire. She placed her bag carefully under the seat. Her son sat by the window, clutching his toy airplane as if it were treasure. She gave him a smile, though her heart was heavy with hurt. The cruel laughter still echoed in her ears, but she chose not to answer, because she believed dignity was greater than arguments, and silence was stronger than anger. The billionaire looked at her again, shaking his head with a mocking grin. He raised his glass of sparkling water. As if to celebrate his own success, his voice grew louder, telling the man beside him how much money he had made in the last month, how many cars he owned, how many people worked for him, and how he would never let his children travel with common people. Every word he spoke was meant to stab at the quiet mother, and passengers nearby began to notice his arrogance. The little boy turned his face away from the window, his small voice trembling but clear. He asked his mother why the man was laughing at them. The mother brushed his hair softly and said, "Some people do not understand life. Some people think money makes them higher, but the sky treats everyone the same." The boy nodded, though his eyes carried tears, and then he whispered back that one day the laughing man would regret it. The mother hugged him gently, her calm expression hiding the storm inside her. The flight attendants walked down the aisle with warm smiles, helping passengers settle. The mother thanked them politely while the billionaire only waved his hand impatiently, asking when his champagne would arrive. The crew nodded quickly and hurried, afraid of his sharp tone, and the other passengers exchanged glances filled with quiet disapproval, but no one dared to speak against him, because his presence carried the heavy air of power and wealth. As the engines roared and the plane prepared to move, the little boy pressed his face to the window, his toy airplane in hand, his excitement slowly pushing away the sting of the billionaire's words. The mother whispered again that everything would be fine. Her calmness made the boy smile again, but deep inside her soul she wondered how long they could sit quietly under the shadow of such arrogance. The billionaire stretched in his seat with pride, looking at his phone, scrolling through pictures of his mansion and luxury cars, occasionally glancing at the mother with the same cruel smirk. He thought her silence was weakness. He thought her calmness meant she was powerless, yet he had no idea that destiny was preparing a lesson for him, a lesson that money could never buy and pride could never erase. The boy leaned closer to his mother, his small voice curious, asking if rich men were always kind or if some were unkind like this one. The mother sighed softly and said, "Wealth does not decide kindness. Some poor people have hearts of gold, some rich people have hearts of stone, and some people only learn kindness when life forces them to see the truth." The boy listened carefully, his young eyes shining with wisdom beyond his years, as if he already understood that the journey ahead would bring something unexpected. The plane began to move faster. The cabin lights dimmed, and the air filled with the sound of engines rising higher and higher. Everyone held their seats. Some closed their eyes, some prayed silently. The mother held her son's hand firmly, whispering courage into his heart, while the billionaire only laughed again, telling himself that life belonged to the powerful, and that nothing could ever shake his throne in the sky. But the truth was already waiting beyond the clouds, and soon the laughter of the billionaire would meet the silence of destiny, and the quiet strength of a mother would begin to shine brighter than gold, as the flight lifted into the endless sky with secrets that none of the passengers could yet see. The flight climbed higher into the open sky. Clouds rolled past the windows like soft mountains of white. The little boy pressed his nose to the glass and whispered in amazement, while his toy airplane rested gently in his small hands. His mother smiled at his wonder. Though her own mind was heavy with the cruel words that still lingered from the billionaire, she reminded herself to stay calm. She reminded herself that patience was stronger than anger, but the sound of arrogant laughter from the seat nearby made her heart ache again. The billionaire leaned back with pride. Snapping his fingers to call the flight attendant, he demanded champagne with a sharp tone, his voice loud enough for everyone in the cabin to hear. When the glass arrived, he raised it high as if making a toast to himself, and he began to speak about his success. He told the man beside him how many companies he owned, how many houses he had across the world, and how he never traveled with simple people like this before. His words cut through the air like knives, and his laughter followed each boast like thunder. He turned his eyes to the quiet mother, his lips curling into a smirk, and he said loudly that children should not be in business class. He said the boy's toy airplane was silly, that real airplanes cost millions, and that poor families like hers could never dream of such things. His laugh echoed in the cabin. Passengers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Some rolled their eyes. Others looked down to avoid trouble. No one dared to answer him. Yet the pain in the mother's eyes was clear to everyone. The little boy hugged his toy tighter, his face red with shame, but then his voice rose with quiet strength. He told his mother that the man was mean, and he whispered softly that one day the laughing man would regret everything he had said. The mother stroked his hair and told him not to worry. She said life always teaches lessons, sometimes faster than we think, and her calm words gave the boy courage, though he was still hurt by the cruelty. The billionaire only laughed harder. He bragged about how he was meeting another billionaire after landing, how important men always welcomed him, how his money opened every door. He asked the man beside him to look at his golden watch. He explained how it cost more than an average family's entire home. His words were heavy with pride, yet his heart was empty, because he measured worth only in things and not in people. The mother looked at her son and whispered that true wealth was love, kindness, and respect. She said money could buy comfort, but it could never buy character. Her words were soft, but they carried power, and the boy nodded, holding them in his heart like a secret treasure, while the billionaire scoffed, thinking her silence meant weakness, not realizing her silence was a shield stronger than any words he could throw. A flight attendant returned to offer meals. She smiled kindly at the mother and boy, giving the child a small chocolate to make him smile. The boy thanked her politely, while the billionaire complained that his meal was too late. He raised his voice again, making the crew nervous. But the mother spoke gently to the boy about patience, about how shouting never solved anything, and her words carried calmness like a light in the noisy cabin. As the meal trays settled and the plane sailed smoothly, the billionaire leaned closer to the man beside him and whispered cruel jokes about the mother, his voice sharp but loud enough for her to hear. He asked why a woman dressed so simply would dare to sit here. He said maybe she borrowed money. Maybe she was pretending to be someone she was not. Each word was meant to break her spirit. Yet she only held her son's hand tighter, her face steady like stone, though her heart ached. The boy finally turned his face toward the billionaire, his eyes brave though small, and he said in a clear voice that laughing at others was wrong. The cabin grew silent for a moment. Everyone looked at the child who had spoken with truth. The billionaire's face twisted with anger and surprise. He did not expect courage from such a small voice, and he muttered under his breath that children should be quiet. But the silence in the cabin made his words weaker than before. The mother whispered to her son to stay calm, to let kindness guide him, and she smiled at him with warmth. Though her eyes showed deep strength, she was proud that her child had spoken truth, proud that he had not bowed to cruelty. The boy smiled back, feeling safe in her love, and together they sat in peace while the billionaire grumbled to himself, though his pride was beginning to shake in the quiet judgment of those around him. The plane continued to glide smoothly, the sky outside turning golden with the setting sun. Light poured through the windows and bathed the cabin in a soft glow. The boy lifted his toy airplane toward the sunlight, pretending it flew among the clouds. His smile returning slowly, the mother watched him with love, while the billionaire stared at them with disbelief. his pride unwilling to bend. Yet a strange feeling grew in his chest, a shadow he could not name, a hint that his laughter would not last forever. And so the flight carried on, with silence heavy around the proud man, with quiet strength shining from the mother, with innocent courage glowing in the child. And though the billionaire still wore his arrogant smile, deep inside the first cracks had begun to show, and the sky itself seemed to wait for the moment when his laughter would finally be tested. The golden light of the sunset filled the cabin with warmth. Passengers relaxed in their seats, some reading books, some watching screens, some already closing their eyes to rest. The quiet mother sat still with her boy, her hand gently holding his. The boy whispered about the clouds outside, saying they looked like giant mountains of cotton, and he smiled again with wonder. But the peace did not last long, for the sky was about to change. A sudden shiver ran through the airplane, a low rumble echoed across the cabin, and the seats shook slightly. At first it felt small, like a tiny bump in the air, but then it grew stronger. The overhead lights flickered once, and passengers gasped. The boy looked up at his mother with wide eyes, his small toy airplane trembling in his hands. The mother whispered softly to him that everything would be fine, her calm voice wrapping him in comfort, even as the cabin filled with fear. The billionaire gripped the armrest of his seat, his golden watch sliding slightly down his wrist as his hand shook. He looked around with nervous eyes, and for the first time his proud smile vanished. He called loudly for the flight attendants, demanding to know what was happening, his voice full of panic, no longer filled with arrogance but with fear. The crew hurried past him, their faces serious, whispering to one another in low voices that the passengers could not hear. This made the air inside the cabin even heavier, as if danger was crawling unseen among them. The plane shook again. Harder this time, trays rattled, glasses slid, and a few drinks spilled onto the floor. One passenger cried out, another whispered a prayer. The boy held tightly to his mother's arm, his little heart pounding fast, yet his mother remained calm, her face steady, her voice soft. She told him again that he was safe, and she whispered that sometimes the sky tests people to see how strong they are. The boy nodded, his trust in her unshaken, while the billionaire stared at them with disbelief. The billionaire shouted that this was impossible, that nothing bad could happen on his flight. He bragged loudly that he only flew the safest airlines. He tried to convince himself that money and power could protect him from the sky, yet his trembling hands betrayed his fear. His arrogance cracked like thin glass, and the other passengers watched silently, some angry at his loud voice, some too afraid to speak, but all sensing that the moment was far from ordinary. The flight attendants rushed back and forth, their faces pale, whispering words into small radios. Avoiding the questions of the passengers, their silence spoke louder than any answer, and fear spread like fire through the cabin. People gripped their seats. Some covered their faces with hands, others squeezed the hands of loved ones. The sound of the engines grew louder, and the shaking continued, heavy and uneven, as if the sky itself was restless. The boy whispered again to his mother, asking why the people looked so scared. The mother stroked his hair and said, "Sometimes fear grows when people cannot see the truth." She told him to breathe deeply, to close his eyes and imagine the ground waiting safely below. Her words carried a strange strength that calmed not only her son, but also some passengers nearby who overheard her gentle tone. Their eyes softened, finding courage in her simple calmness. Though the billionaire. The cabin was heavy with fear as the shaking slowly began to fade. The passengers breathed with relief, but the air still felt strange, like a secret waiting to be revealed. The boy leaned against his mother's arm, whispering that he was glad the turbulence had passed. Yet deep in his heart he sensed something more was coming. The mother gave him a gentle smile, her calmness stronger than the noise around them. And the billionaire wiped sweat from his forehead, trying to bring back his proud expression, though his eyes still darted with unease. The plane grew quiet as the sound of a bell rang overhead. Everyone turned their faces toward the speakers. The captain's voice filled the cabin, slow and steady, but carrying a weight that made every ear listen closely. He said, "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain calm. We have an unusual situation." His words froze the passengers. Whispers rose across the aisles, questions filled the air. What unusual situation? What did he mean? Why did his voice sound so serious? The billionaire laughed nervously, his voice louder than anyone else. He said, "This must be a joke. Nothing unusual ever happens when he flies." He bragged that airlines always treat him like a king, and that the captain was only making a fuss about nothing. But his laugh was thin and shaky, and the passengers could see the cracks in his pride. His golden watch shone under the cabin lights, but the man wearing it was no longer as strong as he pretended to be. The mother closed her eyes for a moment, her lips moving softly, as if she were whispering words of wisdom to herself. The boy looked at her and asked if everything would be all right. She nodded with gentle certainty. She told him sometimes the sky asks people to trust, and when you trust, the truth will show itself. Her words comforted him even as confusion grew, because he did not fully understand what she meant. Yet her calmness made him believe her. The captain's voice returned firmer now. He said, "Our flight is safe, but we must take extra measures because one of our passengers is very important to this journey." Every passenger turned their head, eyes darting from seat to seat, wondering who could be so important. The billionaire raised his hand with a smug smile, declaring loudly that the captain must be talking about him. He said he was the most important man here. He said he was worth more than anyone else on this plane, and he grinned proudly, as if destiny itself had chosen him. But whispers began to grow, quiet and curious. Passengers wondered why the captain would make such an announcement. The flight attendants moved down the aisle, their steps quick but careful, their faces serious and respectful. They did not even glance at the billionaire. Instead, they passed him without a word, and their eyes searched the cabin until they stopped at the quiet mother and her boy. They paused, their heads bowed slightly, and they spoke in voices filled with respect, saying, "Ma'am, the captain requests your guidance." Gasps filled the cabin. The passengers stared in shock. The boy's eyes widened in surprise, but also with a strange spark of pride. The billionaire sat frozen in disbelief, his lips parted but no sound leaving his mouth. His golden watch seemed useless now, his power slipping like sand between his fingers. And the mother opened her eyes slowly. Nodding with grace, she rose from her seat calmly, her boy still holding her hand tightly, and the attendants guided her toward the front of the plane. The whispers turned into waves of questions. Who was she? Why did the captain call for her? Why did the crew treat her with such respect? The passengers leaned toward one another, their eyes following the mother as she walked with quiet strength, her steps calm even though the entire cabin was staring at her. The boy walked beside her, his toy airplane clutched firmly in his small hand, and his face glowing with pride as if he already knew his mother's true worth. The billionaire finally found his voice. He shouted that this was nonsense. He said the captain should have called for him. He said he was the richest man here, the one who deserved all respect. His voice grew louder and louder, but the attendants did not even look at him. Their eyes were only on the mother, and their respectful silence was stronger than all his arrogant words. His laughter had turned into desperate cries, and the passengers no longer admired him. They only looked at him with pity. The mother reached the curtain that separated the cabin from the cockpit. She turned her head once, her eyes meeting those of her son, her smile calm and full of love. The boy nodded bravely, holding his toy high like a symbol of hope, and the passengers sat in silence, their curiosity burning like fire, waiting for the truth that was about to be revealed. The billionaire sank back into his seat, his face pale, his hands trembling, as fear and confusion replaced his arrogance. The captain's voice came again, saying, "Thank you everyone for your patience. Please remain calm as we receive help from someone who knows this sky better than anyone." His words struck the billionaire like a hammer, for he realized in that moment that the quiet mother he had mocked was not ordinary at all. She carried something greater than wealth, something greater than pride, and the truth was about to change everything, and so the cabin waited. Every heart beating fast, every mind filled with questions, while the mother stepped forward into the unknown, her quiet strength shining brighter than gold, and the flight itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the moment when secrets hidden in silence would finally come into the light. The cabin was silent as the mother walked toward the front, every eye fixed on her. The whispers grew louder behind her, passengers leaning in their seats trying to understand. Who was this woman? Why did the captain need her? What secret was hiding in her calm face? The boy followed closely, holding her hand with his small fingers, his toy airplane still clutched in the other. His heart beating fast but full of pride, the billionaire sat frozen, his face pale, his golden watch glinting under the cabin lights but carrying no power now. He shook his head again and again, whispering to himself that this was madness. He said loudly that the captain had made a mistake. He shouted that the only important person here was him, his voice cracked with desperation. Yet the flight attendants ignored him completely, their eyes still fixed on the mother, their respect for her shining clearly for everyone to see. The captain's voice came through the speaker once more. He said, "Ladies and gentlemen, I must explain. The reason we ask for this woman's help is because she is not only a passenger, she is someone who once saved hundreds of lives in the sky. She is a brilliant aviation engineer who discovered a hidden fault in a jet years ago, a fault that could have destroyed an entire flight. Because of her knowledge and her courage, many families survived that day. His voice carried honor and gratitude, and the entire cabin gasped with shock. The mother lowered her head humbly as the attendants guided her to the cockpit. The boy's eyes shone with tears of pride. He whispered softly that he always knew his mother was special. The passengers clapped their hands slowly. Some even cried, and admiration spread across the cabin like light chasing away darkness. Meanwhile, the billionaire's face twisted with disbelief. He tried to laugh, but his laugh was hollow and weak. He muttered that this was impossible, that someone so simple could not be so great, but no one listened to him anymore. The boy looked back at the billionaire, his young voice soft but sharp with truth. He said quietly that laughing at others was never wise, because the one you laugh at might one day be the one who saves you. The words cut through the air like lightning. The billionaire felt them strike deep into his chest, and he lowered his eyes for the first time, unable to meet the gaze of the child he had mocked. Inside the cockpit, the mother examined screens and instruments, her calm voice speaking with the captain and co-pilot. She pointed out what needed to be adjusted. She explained what the turbulence meant. Her sharp eyes saw details that others had missed, and her steady guidance brought peace to the crew. Slowly, the plane regained balance. The trembling softened. The cabin grew steadier, and hope began to return like a dawn, breaking through a long night. The passengers waited anxiously, their eyes glued to the curtain, their hearts beating fast. Then the captain's voice returned. He said, "Ladies and gentlemen, thanks to her guidance, the danger has passed. We are safe to continue our journey," and the entire cabin erupted in cheers and applause. Hands clapped together, voices cried with relief. The boy hugged his toy airplane and whispered that his mother was his hero, his smile glowing like sunshine. And passengers around him smiled too, some reaching to pat his head gently with warmth. The billionaire sank back in his seat, his pride shattered like glass. He covered his face with one trembling hand, his other hand clutching his golden watch as if it could save him, but it could not. For the truth had been revealed. The woman he had mocked was greater than him in every way that truly mattered. His heart pounded with shame, and he felt smaller than he had ever felt in his entire life. The mother returned from the cockpit with quiet grace. She sat beside her son once more. The boy hugged her tightly and whispered that he was proud. The passengers around her clapped again, some thanking her with grateful smiles, others with kind words. She nodded humbly, saying softly that she only did what she was meant to do, that helping others was always the right thing. Her voice calm and full of wisdom, stronger than any speech the billionaire had ever given. The billionaire finally stood, his legs shaking, his voice broken. He walked slowly to the mother's seat, his head bowed. The entire cabin watched in silence. He spoke in a trembling tone, saying he was sorry, saying he had been blind, saying he had let pride cover his eyes. He begged her to forgive his cruel laughter. He said he had learned a lesson he would never forget, his words filled with regret. The mother looked at him kindly, her eyes calm, her voice gentle. She said, "Respect is free, it costs nothing, yet it means everything." She told him that money may buy many things, but it cannot buy dignity or kindness. She told him that true greatness is not in wealth, but in the way we treat others. Her words struck the billionaire like truth carved in stone, and he nodded with tears in his eyes, whispering thank you again and again. The boy looked at the billionaire and said softly that it was never too late to change, his words pure and innocent, carrying a weight that touched the billionaire's heart. The passengers nodded quietly, some even wiping tears from their eyes. The moment was heavy with emotion, a lesson written in the air itself, and the cabin that had once been filled with arrogance now overflowed with respect and humility. The flight continued safely through the sky, the stars beginning to shine outside the windows. Passengers relaxed once more, but their hearts carried a story they would never forget. The billionaire sat in silence beside his pride, broken but wiser. The mother held her boy close, her strength glowing quietly, and the boy held his toy airplane high, whispering that even the smallest voices could make the biggest difference in the world. The cabin was calmer now. The heavy fear had lifted. Passengers leaned back in their seats with relief. The sound of quiet conversations filled the air, and the soft glow of the cabin lights wrapped around them like warmth after a storm. The little boy sat by the window, still holding his toy airplane, his eyes bright with pride. His mother sat beside him with her calm smile, while the billionaire sat frozen, his head bowed, his golden watch heavy on his wrist yet powerless to hide his shame. He thought about his laughter, his cruel words, his arrogance that had filled the air earlier. He remembered how he mocked the boy, how he insulted the mother, and now the truth burned inside him like fire. The very woman he had treated as nothing was the one who had saved his life, the one who had guided the plane safely through danger, the one who carried real greatness, not in her hands or her wealth, but in her heart and her wisdom. His chest tightened as regret filled him like a flood. The boy leaned against his mother's shoulder, whispering softly that she was his hero, and passengers nearby smiled, some wiping their eyes, their respect shining clearly. The mother stroked her son's hair gently, whispering that she was only doing her duty, that helping others was always the right path. Her voice calm and full of kindness, her strength quiet but powerful, and in that silence the billionaire finally stood, his steps heavy, his face pale, his pride broken into pieces. The entire cabin grew quiet as he walked slowly to the mother's seat. Every eye followed him, every heart curious to see what he would do. He stopped before her and lowered his head, his voice shaking like a child. He said he was sorry. He said he had been blind. He said he had judged her wrongly. He begged for forgiveness. He admitted that all his wealth meant nothing in that sky, that her calm strength had saved him, saved everyone, and he said he would never forget the lesson she had taught him. The mother looked at him with steady eyes. Her voice soft but firm, she said, respect is free, and yet it is the richest gift you can give. She said money is useful, but it cannot measure the worth of a soul. She said true greatness is found in kindness, in humility, in the way we treat people. Her words were simple, but they cut deep, and the billionaire felt his chest ache with truth. He nodded again and again, whispering thank you. Tears falling down his cheeks, the boy looked up at the billionaire. His small voice pure and honest, he said it is never too late to change. He said even people who laugh at others can learn to be kind. His words carried innocence but also strength, and they struck the billionaire harder than anything else. For in the voice of the child he heard the hope of forgiveness, the chance to be different, the chance to finally become more than just a man with money. The passengers began to clap softly, their applause growing louder, not only for the mother but also for the lesson that had filled the cabin. They clapped for kindness, for courage, for the truth that wealth is empty without respect. And the billionaire covered his face with his hands, overcome with emotion, his shoulders shaking as he cried, something he had not done in years, something pride had always hidden, but now pride was gone and only truth remained. The plane continued smoothly through the night sky, the stars shining bright outside. The captain's voice came again, warm and steady. He said thank you once more to the brave mother who guided them. He said this flight will always be remembered because of her, and passengers cheered again, their hearts light with gratitude, their fear replaced with admiration. The boy hugged his mother tightly, whispering that he would always remember this day, that he would never forget what she had done. The billionaire returned to his seat slowly, but he was not the same man anymore. His face was different, softer, humbled. He looked at the toy airplane in the boy's hand, and he whispered across the aisle that maybe one day the boy would fly real airplanes. Maybe one day he would guide the skies just like his mother. The boy smiled shyly, and the billionaire smiled back. A real smile this time, not proud, not arrogant, but human, honest and grateful. The mother rested her head back, her eyes closing briefly, her son leaning on her shoulder. The cabin filled with peace at last, passengers whispering quietly about the lesson they had just witnessed, their hearts touched by the strength of a quiet woman, by the courage of a small boy, by the fall and rise of a man who once laughed but now bowed to the truth. The sky outside stretched wide and endless, carrying the plane safely forward. When the plane finally began to descend, the city lights sparkled below like stars on the ground. The boy's eyes widened with wonder again. The passengers cheered softly. The captain thanked them once more for their calm, and the mother whispered to her son that they were almost home. The billionaire sat silently, staring at the lights, whispering a promise to himself that he would never laugh cruelly again, that he would live with respect and kindness, because life had shown him that pride was fragile, but respect was eternal. The wheels touched the ground. The cabin filled with applause once more. The passengers clapped for safety, for relief, for the mother who had guided them through fear. The billionaire stood aside this time, offering his hand to help the mother with her bag, his voice quiet and full of respect. He said, "Thank you, ma'am," and she nodded with a gentle smile, her words soft as she replied, "Respect costs nothing yet gives everything." And with that, the passengers left the plane carrying more than luggage. They carried a story, a lesson, a memory that would never fade. And so the flight ended, but the truth lived on. The quiet mother walked away with her son hand in hand, the boy holding his toy airplane high. The billionaire followed behind, a changed man, his laughter gone, his pride broken, his heart awake, and the sky above stretched endlessly, whispering the lesson that no wealth is greater than kindness, and no heart is richer than the one that knows how to respect.